throughout we have been talking about natural language. Okay? When we wind it up, let me put it in perspective in the following sense. What is natural language? The language that people speak. Okay? The object of inquiry for study in linguistics has always and only been language that people speak, which is natural language. Studying such a phenomena, when we started looking at underlying structure of language, that is not individual languages but language, then people found lot of facts, lot of things which were very exciting, very interesting. And again, with such things, when people started looking at formalization of that stuff at a completely abstract level, that is the phenomena which people started calling linguistic theory. Okay? And then in the theoretical domain of linguistics, around the theoretical studies, then emerged some of the, there has always been a discussion around what could be theoretical, what is not theoretical, what is it that we should focus on more, and what is not, what are the things that were left out. Okay? Anyway, the point that I am trying to make is, in the debates concerning linguistic theory, the distinction between E-language and I-language were always a very crucial distinction. Abstraction from the data from natural language was possible only with I-language. We have looked at the distinction between E-language and I-language at length, and I think by now, the moment when we say I-language and E-language, we understand what we are talking about. We don't need to get into the definitions of E-language and I-language at this stage. So, I-language, linguistic competence, linguistic theory, all these things became synonymous terms. People started using them interchangeably. Native speakers' intuition, native capacity, biological foundation, the facts around, not facts, the foundations for a biological basis of language, all these things were in a way connected discussions. And then there is a whole range of discussions which can be covered under E-language. So, this distinction was very clear. And for a long time, people talking about I-language will not discuss things that concern E-language. And definitely, people talking about E-language would many a times believe that discussions in the field of I-language are not really that interesting for us. Okay? You see the distinction and the sort of it emerged in a form of rivalry. which is not actually the case. It's a very interesting distinction that there is certain things which can only be discussed at the level of abstraction, which are common, which have really a foundation for the study of the whole phenomena of language, and then there are certain things which are external factors in language, which are called e-language, e-language phenomena. So, there has been a very few attempts to put the two things together and see how it looks. That's the point I am trying to make. There has been distinction. People have been working in two areas individually, but there has been very few attempts to see such things together. The important question is, the things that are in the domain of e-language, aren't they part of theoretical linguistics? Can't they be studied within the domains of theoretical linguistics? And if not, then how do we accommodate them? How do we study them? Okay? To deal with such a thing, I don't want to go into too much of details of that discussion. To deal with such a thing, when we were discussing here linguistic theory and the study of the form of language, at this stage, and then we also discussed e-language, but we didn't discuss enough about the function of language in society. That is, how language functions when it intersects with society. See, language in a real world is a social phenomena as well, right? The moment we speak it, it becomes e-language. And when we speak in society. We interact with people. And then there are lots of things which are good, not good, which are only related to I language, are not relevant for the shapes and forms of E language, and the way they get the way we look at it in the society. Okay. Now, so language in a real world is definitely a different phenomena, and how it governs itself and how it functions in society, how it works vis-a-vis other languages, we haven't looked at such things in details. However, the goal for me for today is to look at when we look at the form of language, we find several things that are difficult for linguistic theory to explain. In other words, we find several things which could be sensitive to cultural elements in language. Okay? How do we accommodate them and how do we study them if we don't find answers in linguistic theory about them? That's an important question. So I wanted to show you some such stuff in natural language, and I have examples from Hindi to show you. However, again, like I always say, you can find such things in all languages, at least the languages that you speak. Then it becomes more interesting that if such things are available in all languages, then they definitely be part of linguistic theory, and linguistic theory must be adequate enough to explain such things. Why is it that we are unable to explain them? Okay? Or the moment someone raises these kinds of questions are brushed aside under the domains of E-languages, the phenomena of E-language, and therefore may not have direct relevance to I language, and therefore not an adequate or appropriate explanation. So let us see what those forms are, what those things are, and decide for ourselves whether they are making sense or not, whether such things require explanations or not, and then we will see its significance for linguistic theory. See, like I told you in the beginning, we have seen about language learning, right? You have looked at language learning in great details. The terms like language acquisition device, universal grammar should now be part of general terminology for you. So, and on the basis of such a discussion, we concluded that this phrase that learning a language is child's play really suits when we talk about language learning. That it is such a natural phenomena for any child to pick up a language from the society that we don't pay much attention to, but when we look into this phenomena at our length, then we see several interesting issues around that. And how one of the ways that we can put it is, we are not born knowing English, French or Thai or Tamil or Telugu. Rather, we are born with innate knowledge of certain universal structures. And then when they get interpreted, when they interact with real examples from the real world, we say or we feel that we have picked up a language. Okay? We have discussed all these things. We have also looked at we have also defined what principles are and what parameters are with reference to universal grammar, and of course we have looked at what universal grammar is, okay, at some length. Then see, the last point is relevant with respect to the first two, that children are born with abstract structural knowledge about language, which allow them to discover the rules of particular language. Okay? So, the abstract structure that we have available with us is what is responsible for a particular language, for us learning a particular language, to engage in constant evaluation as to construct the simplest possible system, the linguistic data. It's the circular thing that we look at linguistic data to understand how we learn it, and then we finally, the way we learn language is through abstract linguistic structure. There is a purpose why I am mentioning these things to you, because this is just a reminder in order to evaluate the data that we are going to look at. The data, the set of data that you are going to see, isn't that set also invoking some of these issues? Can we not deal with that data under this framework? Okay? So, let us see. And then I have just talked to you about these terms, that I language means competence, that is linguistic competence, and then it means knowledge of language. So, these are the interchangeable terms, e-language, performance, and the knowledge of the use of language. This is the term which I want you to look at afresh. Does this term make sense to you? Knowledge of the use of language. What's the difference? What could be the difference between knowledge of language and knowledge of the use of language? So, in one way, I could have summarized or given this title for what we are doing today, that is there a difference between what we know as knowledge of language and then the knowledge of the use of language. Get the point? And if there is any, can that difference not be part of what we know as knowledge of language? In other words, can the knowledge of use of language also not be part of knowledge of language itself? Am I making my point? So, what do you think when this? What do you think this term means? Knowledge of the use of language. consciously?
Knowledge of language is not conscious, like you have some intuition about it.
Right.
But knowledge of the use of languages, you are kind of thinking and all the rules and then making sentences.
In a way, to some extent you can say, okay, one can say okay, but when you think little harder, then it doesn't look like a conscious choice. For example, I am going to show you some of them, some of those things, and then please evaluate this thing at that stage with reference to that data, and then I will bring this to you again. Do you get this thing? What is the knowledge of the use of language? And even before that, what do we mean by use of language? The use of language is a e-language phenomena. Okay? And then, is that knowledge of the use of language too different from what we know as knowledge of language? What you said about knowledge of language is clear. Is not a conscious thing. It's an abstract thing. It keeps on building. It's about the things that we know, but we do not know them explicitly. All those things are fine. But then at that, with such a description of knowledge of language, is the knowledge of the use of language also not part of the knowledge of language, is the key thing that we are trying to discuss in the domains of the things that we have seen so far. And this is why I mentioned to you universal grammar, principles and parameters. Okay? All right. So, e-language equates language for general purpose cognition. I just mentioned this thing. I know I haven't discussed cognition in details with you. Give me a minute for that. You see, there are two terms in the cognitive studies. Okay, in the domains of cognitive studies, language is just one part. Okay, language is not all about cognition. Or for that matter, cognition is not, the study of cognition is not everything about language alone. Okay? Cognition is a much bigger domain, and in that domain, language just happens to be one part. That's one. The second is when with such a foundation, when we start and when people come to language, the question they raise is, do we learn language the way we learn everything else? Or is language different from all other kinds of learning? Okay? Doesn't sound very complicated, but when they look at it in details and with inputs from study of language, the study of the structure of language, and language as the whole phenomena, has contributed a lot to this understanding, to this question. And on the basis of that, is such studies, and in order to understand that question, people have convincingly accepted that language may not be a general purpose cognition. So there are two parts of all kinds of learning. All kinds of learning in the field of cognition can be divided in two parts. One, general purpose cognition, and the other, specific purpose cognition. Okay? So things like singing, swimming, riding a bicycle, okay, seeing, and multitasking of all these things, all of them are general purpose cognition. Okay? Because we put conscious effort in learning of these things. That's the only distinction. We put conscious effort in learning of these things. Nobody is born singing. Okay? See, the argument is, and the argument for why language could be a specific purpose cognition is, language to humans is exactly like flying to birds. Okay. Birds do not learn to fly with a conscious choice. Okay. Similarly, humans do not learn to speak with conscious choice. When we look at language, we must look at it and when we look at other parts of language, like you may have noticed, we have never talked about writing, how we write, right? Writing could be general purpose cognition, because we learn to write with a specific efforts. Speaking a language, us growing to speak a language, or us growing with the ability to speak language has nothing to do with writing. Okay? So, writing is like singing, writing is like drawing, but language to humans is exactly like how flying is for birds or swimming is for fishes. I mean, fishes do not learn to swim, right? Similarly, and here we are making the distinction, we are using the word learn carefully. So far, we have been using learning language interchangeably with cognition, with acquisition, but now we are using it with little bit of care. Get my point? So, with this distinction, of specific purpose cognition and general purpose cognition, anything that is innate to humans or to the species is called specific purpose. But again, when we divide and try to see language in parts, then the argument is e-language, that is the use of language, could be general purpose cognition. I-language, that is knowledge of language, may be part of special purpose cognition, or the language is argued to be special purpose cognition. Is when someone argues language is a special purpose cognition, what they really mean is language, the I-language part, the innateness part is only what makes language a specific purpose cognition. E-language part or the writing part does not make language a special purpose cognition, and that much is acceptable. That's a good debate on that. So, do you understand what this means? The e-language equates language to general purpose cognition. This making sense? All right. So, let's move. We can spend 1 or 2 hours talking about language and cognition and how language is a specific purpose cognition. There has been a huge debate in both the study of language, in the field of the study of language and in the field of cognitive studies about this. I mean, there could be a semester, forget about an hour or two, there could be a semester long course only evaluating these two aspects. Okay? But let me show you more evidence. I am more interested in that. I am showing you evidence for you to decide how this works, and then I'm more curious in coming to the data part. So, look at it again. So, is this clear? So, the reason why I talked about specific purpose and general purpose cognition, because I mentioned knowledge of language and the knowledge of the use of language. The argument is one could be part of a specific purpose cognition and the other could be part of general purpose cognition. Is that debate or is that argument based on some facts, some data? Do we have data to support that, or does the data support something else or show you something else? This could be one of the big things. I haven't worked myself on this part enough to give you a conclusive answer, but that's a very interesting question in the field of both cognitive studies and study of language. So, let me show you some more part. Okay, there is one more part here, one more part here which I want you to keep in mind. You must have heard the term culture. This is again one of the terms which we have never mentioned in all our discussions so far, because this is also argued to be relevant to e-language. Lot of people have studied culture as part of language, language having shades of cultural influences. Okay? Some people argue that it's not possible to separate culture from language and language from culture. All such things are possible and nobody denies these things. The idea is not to deny these things, it's just to underline that this is an important part, relevant part. And also we do find evidence for when we when we acquire language, the more interesting part or more interesting role of culture comes in acquisition of language. When we acquire language, and if language and culture are intertwined with one another, are inseparable parts, right, then aren't we acquiring cultural parts as well when we are acquiring language? Or are we separating cultural parts and only acquiring linguistic phenomena from the environment, right? These are the questions which we did not discuss when we were talking about language acquisition. Okay? We may have mentioned that we did not. And once you look at how cultural elements are really not separable from language, then you realize that we do not acquire a language. So when we are in a society and society gives us input for language acquisition, we are just acquiring what is available in society. We are not acquiring Hindi, Telugu or Tamil. And this is a technical point. I am not only interested in the names of the language. I hope you understand, and this makes sense. We have talked about this point little bit at the earlier stage. Clear? In other words, we do not acquire language devoid of culture. It's not possible. Okay? We may not, when we say we do not acquire language without culture, we are saying it's such a thing that we don't need to pay specific attention to. Then all the more reason that we are making the same point, that it's acquired along with language, right? So language is culture and culture is language. These are the reasons why people say the last thing. Okay? So keep this part also in mind, and I don't want to get too much into details of the definitions and these things. It's not really worthwhile for us to try define culture, and that's not relevant for our discussion right now. But one word about that is everything that we do and the kinds of abstract constraints that we feel, right, and that we follow, as a conscious choice or as a subconscious choice, is all coming from cultural components. Okay? That's all about culture. I can say, rest you can read. Okay? So now let me give you the data, and I want your specific attention to the points that I am going to make with reference to this data. Many of you have this much of competence in Hindi, and if not, don't worry. The discussion is not the competence of Hindi. The discussion is the point that I am trying to make. The first sentence, Raju kalam chahta hai, is not really a very acceptable sentence in Hindi. You see this thing? I have put a question mark also, because a star means completely unacceptable, ungrammatical, and question mark means not really ungrammatical, it may be unacceptable. Okay? And to some people it might be acceptable also. So it's just the judgment, speaker's judgment, that is reflected with a star and question marks. But as a consensus decision, this is not really a very good sentence in Hindi. The question is why? What's wrong in this sentence? This sentence has and since you have gone through everything, so it will make more sense to you. This sentence has everything intact. It has a subject, it has a predicate, it has a subject which agrees with the verb, all kinds of agreements, every single component that you have seen is taken care of. Subject, predicate, agreement between subject and the verb, agreement between subject and predicate, its transitive nature, assignment of cases, thematic relations, all kinds of things that you have seen which are responsible for generating a grammatical sentence is intact here. Why is this sentence not acceptable to speakers of Hindi? Okay? The point that I started with, that linguistic theory must explain grammaticality or ungrammaticality of a sentence, right? All other ungrammatical sentences that we have seen so far, we have seen why such sentences are not grammatical, right? When we say what your name is, right? You may have heard people talking in the following way. What you are talking? Have you heard people saying this thing? If I say what you are talking is not a grammatical sentence, can we not explain this sentence why this is not grammatical? This is not grammatical because this does not fulfill the requirements of question formation in English. The requirement of question formation in English is tense must be fronted. So when you say what are you talking about is a good sentence, but when you say what you are talking or what you are talking about is not a good sentence, right? We have explained all these things. So why can we not explain this thing? And rather, we don't have much to explain here. This sentence, from all the components of linguistic theory, is a grammatical one, right? Now, the moment you talk about first sentence, many people will tell you, look at the second one, this is okay, and there is absolutely no problem with that sentence. Okay? Now, let me we can talk a lot about these things, but let me give you a possible explanation and then see if it works or not. You see, the second sentence, and therefore I have put the verbs in colors. Okay? The verb in second sentence and the verb in first sentence, to many people they look related, but they are not related verbs. Chahiye is a verb in Hindi which is a frozen verb. That verb does not inflect for anything. That is, no tense marker, nothing comes on that verb. Okay? Like we have, take an example of a verb like khana. So we can say khata hun, right? We can say kha raha hun. We can say khaya, right? Khayega. All kinds of things are possible, all kinds of inflections are possible on that verb, but on the verb chahiye, no inflections are possible. Okay? That is what I am trying to say. Chahna is a different verb, which is in the first sentence. Chahna means to want, right? And they look related because chahiye, listen to me carefully, and since you have seen all these things, therefore I can move a little faster and I have to give you more data. Okay? Listen to this carefully. The verb chahna, what does the verb chahna means in the first sentence? Want. Clear? This is the only verb in Hindi which cannot have imperatives. Do you understand what I mean by imperatives? Like when we say khana as the verb, what's the imperative verb out of this? Khao, right? Or khaiye, right? If we say baithna, then baitho or baithiye. When we say the verb chahna, the imperative is not possible. So you can request someone to sit. And the reason for that is The reason why imperative is not possible is you can request someone to sit, to eat, to read, to sleep. You cannot request anyone to want. Want is such a thing that cannot be either forced or requested. Understand this thing? Therefore, chahiye sounds like the imperative of chahna. But that is not the case. Therefore, they look related, but that is not the case. They are two different verbs. Now, the reason why I am saying they are two different verbs is following. See, do you see the subject agreeing with the verb in the second sentence? You know the rules, and that I have underlined you, that if the subject is followed by a postposition in South Asian languages, then the subject does not agree with the verb, right? I do not have the other example ready. Raju ne chai banai, the example that I had given you long time ago. The object chai agrees with the verb, and therefore that becomes the grammatical subject. I have shown you the distinction between logical subject and grammatical subject before, and the reason why logical subject was not grammatical sentence in that kind of context was because of the postposition that was following it does not leave it in a position to agree with the verb. In this case, second sentence, the subject does not agree with the verb, right? Subject is not in a position to agree with the verb. Such sentences are called indirect sentences, where subjects do not agree with the verb. And in the first sentence, the subject agrees with the verb, right? So that is the direct sentence. Now, here is the explanation, which has very little or almost nothing to do with linguistic theory, or this cannot be counted as theoretical explanation. The answer to such a question is, such an ungrammaticality is, in a language like Hindi, and check it with your languages, in a language like Hindi, expressing desire directly with the help of direct sentences is not acceptable. Okay? Now you can question, what is the desire here? Right? The desire is to want for anything, to want for things. Please pay attention to this thing, and then you can think about it later. To want for things, right? You can call it a hypocritical thing, okay? But to want for things is not permitted, is not acceptable for speakers of these languages. So, I can demonstrate this to you. I do not want to say I can prove it to you, but I can demonstrate it to you. You can say, मैं खाना चाहता हूँ, okay? You can say, मैं जाना चाहता हूँ, right? You can say, मैं कलम खरीदना चाहता हूँ. All these sentences are okay, aren't they? So, the moment you say, I want to do something, that's all right. But if I want something is not all right. Okay? मैं खाना चाहता हूँ, मैं जाना चाहता हूँ, मैं घर जाना चाहता हूँ, स्कूल जाना चाहता हूँ, that's all right. That's also expressing desire, but that's the desire about doing something is okay. But the desire, expression of desire to get something is not acceptable. Do you see this? Do you see this thing? Therefore, this sentence is unacceptable. Change this sentence to मैं स्कूल जाना चाहता हूँ, that's perfectly all right. So, स्कूल जाना is also an object, and I want to translate it in the terms that you are familiar with. School jana can be the object of the verb chahna. Chahna is a transitive verb. Okay? School jana becomes the object of the transitive verb. Okay. This is a transitive verb and it has an object. Look at this. What's the object here right now? Pen. But so its all requirements are fulfilled. But still the sentence is not acceptable. But no, hold on, I'm coming to that. Hold on. So, what I am saying is, look at the nature of the object of the verb. If the object is just a thing, that kind of object is not allowed. But if the object is denoting about doing something, then that's all right, acceptable. Therefore, a possible conclusion, I am not saying it's a conclusive conclusion, a possible conclusion is probably for speakers of this language, expressing desire in a direct sentence is not acceptable. And therefore, even with that explanation, what is interesting? Why are we discussing this sentence? The reason why we are discussing this sentence is expressing desire or not expression of desire can be captured in the structure of language with the nature of object. Okay? But linguistic theory does not answer this question. Linguistic theory does not have a device to account for or to describe what goes on, what's explaining this culturally sensitive element, and this happens only to Hindi and maybe to other South Asian languages, but doesn't happen to English. In English, it's perfectly okay to say I want a pen, right? I want a shirt. In Hindi, you cannot say I want a shirt. मैं कमीज चाहता हूँ is not possible to say. You have to say मुझे कमीज चाहिए. So what happens with the second sentence is speakers subconsciously convert the desire into a requirement. Chahiye expresses requirement, I need one. So the moment all kinds of desires we convert into requirement, then it's all right. We can even say मुझे $5 million चाहिए. As long as you are expressing it as a requirement, that's allowed. You are expressing even a small thing as a desire is not allowed. Is not acceptable. I hope you see the point. So, such a thing is difficult to explain from the aspects of linguistic theory that we have seen so far. Clear? You can think more about this thing. Let me make at least one more point before we stop. Look at this sentence. We'll move quickly from this. Raju ke do bacche hain, right? And the second sentence is Raju ke paas do gaadiyan hain, right? Both the things in red. What are these elements in grammar in a sentence? Something equivalent to preposition. These things are called postpositions in our languages. Now look at the choice of the two postpositions and the function of these two postpositions. They are not interchangeable. Can we say Raju ke paas do bacche hain? Why not? What's wrong?
Ke paas generally implies possession of something.
Ke paas definitely implies possession of something.
You don't generally use the phrase possession for kids. That ke paas do bacche usually means that he currently is having two kids with him at the moment and not the two kids are his. So
True.
for example, if Raju was a nanny or something or a school teacher, then you can say ke paas do bacche.
Sure, absolutely right. What you are saying is you actually don't want to say that I own kids, but it's okay to say I own cars. Why? That description is perfectly all right. Well, what goes wrong? There are other languages in which we can say I have two kids, I have two cars. Do they mean that they own kids? No. Do you see, we resolve this kind of ambiguity in English. See, even English speakers do want to make a distinction of the kind that we are making in these two sentences, right? But their effort to make that distinction is at this level, is still here. In other words, that does not get reflected in structure of sentence, right? We are not saying that English is a bad language and they don't make a distinction between kids and cars. That's not what we are trying to argue. I mean that's a very inadequate, inappropriate way of explaining language. And if we make such, if we discuss such things or describe such things, then it means we don't understand language. Rather, what we are saying is, speakers of English are aware of this distinction. It works in English as well. When someone says, I have 2 kids, they really don't mean, they don't mean that we have no distinction between kids and cars. That's taken care of, that's here, right? It's just that such a distinction does not become apparent in the structure of language. And what you have said is absolutely right, and that kind of distinction becomes apparent in the structure of language in Hindi. That's all is the point that I am trying to make. What becomes interesting is how do we explain it theoretically? Why is it restricted to the choice of postpositions? What we are saying, what you said, we can put it in a more generic terms, and then that applies to everything, which is human relations for Hindi and for the speakers of South Asian languages is inseparable elements. For all inseparable elements, you must use the first postposition. Okay? And for all separable things, you can use the second one. The terms are alienable and inalienable. Okay? Therefore, human relations are inalienable in our cultural constructs. And you define what you mean by human relations. Whether you mean kids, parents, or even friends. We can't say, मेरे पास 2 दोस्त हैं. Right? You may remember one of the famous Hindi movie sentence, मेरे पास माँ है. Right? Remember this thing? That was artificially created to draw people's attention. See, that movie or any other Hindi movie, how many sentences are there in a movie of 3 hours? Do we even count? But we paid attention, or people paid attention to one sentence because that was artificially created, because that's not the canonical order of the sentence, right? For drawing attention. Now, let's not go there, but all I am trying to say is it's not possible. And that distinction, that kind of distinction, it's not possible to use K-pass for inalienable elements in Hindi. Like inalienable, the real example of an inalienable element in Hindi is, let's say, hands. I have 2 hands. How do we say that? Can we say मेरे पास 2 हाथ है? We don't. मेरे पास 2 कान है. Do we say that? No. What's wrong with that sentence? I have 2 ears. I can say I have 2 cars. मेरे पास 2 गाड़ियाँ हैं. I have 2 hands. Why can't we say मेरे पास 2 हाथ है? The problem is when we try to say मेरे पास 2 हाथ है, it sounds like it's a detachable thing and I have 2 things in my bag. Right? So this is a real example of inalienable stuff. Right? Inseparable thing. Like our body parts are inalienable and inseparable, human relations have been captured in the structure of Hindi as inalienable element. Therefore, we cannot say मेरे पास 2 बच्चे. See this thing? This distinction is captured in Hindi, but how do we explain this in linguistic theory? It's just my observation and proposal that it's not possible to explain this fact in linguistic theory.
Because linguistic theory is concerned only with the grammatical, not with acceptability.
That's the argument that has always been given. But the point is, we just saw the sentence before. Therefore, I gave you that in the as an order first. See, both are about the use of language, right? Do people teach us this thing? That you cannot say, मेरे पास 2 बच्चे हैं, because बच्चा is inseparable. Has anyone taught you this thing? No. Has anyone taught us as a conscious thing that, expressing desire for things is not a good thing in Hindi? Is not a good thing for us. We are great people. Has anyone taught us this thing? No. If this is part of e-language, true, absolutely. Linguistic theory is about I language and the grammatical stuff at the level of abstraction. Agreed. But these are also parts of acquisition which are subconscious, which are part of acquisition. We learn them without efforts. If we learn them without efforts, if the input comes through language and they get reflected in language, then how could linguistic theory shy away from explaining these things? I agree that it's not possible, but what I am trying to say is it's not possible because we have not tried hard enough. We have only looked at the aspects of I language. We have not looked at the other things that we acquire along with language. Now, you tell me whether these things are acquired along with language or not, right? The aspect that I have just described to you, you agree with this thing or not? You have always been speaking Hindi this way, or by you I mean those who speak Hindi, but you ask them to explain. This is innate knowledge for Hindi speakers. Therefore, my question is the knowledge of language use, which has been categorized as a separate thing of e-language, not part of knowledge of language itself? And I am only giving you two examples. The languages are full of such examples. You need to evaluate your language, you need to evaluate your others languages. Making my point? Clear? Okay. Do I have time for just one more example? Okay, just one more example. Look at this sentence, imperative sentences, right? One is, when we teach these things, it's taught as command and request. If we put more efforts, we can teach them as informal and formal, right? Ghar jao, ghar aao, or ghar aiye, right? But look at it. How do we acquire this knowledge? We know how to use these things very well without any difficulty or without any effort. And we know more about such complexities in the sense that when I am talking to a friend, when you are talking to a friend and I say ghar aao, is that really commanding a friend? Is that not a request? That could very well be a request. In fact, to a friend who you have very informal relationship with and you tell them ghar aiye, that could sound sarcastic to them, right? Now, what sounds is not what we are discussing. What we are discussing is, we as the speakers of language know which one to use in which situation, right? How did we acquire this knowledge? In fact, if there is any sort of teaching, that's quite contrary. We are taught categorization, aao as command, aiye as request. But then where did we learn that no, that's not true. Somebody may have taught that to us, but we never accept that. We learn that, we are taught, we learn that if I like questions and quizzes that we give you, you reproduce that on quiz also. That one is command, the other is request. Do you get my point? But we never accept it here. Here, we know it clearly that we know how to use them appropriately. We never tell our friends ghar aiye, because we know we will sound sarcastic and probably they will not even come. So if I am talking to somebody informally, I can say ghar aao, and that's a good enough request, right? Get my point? And I have already given you this example, I guess, that if a commander-in-chief of army tells a army general that please come and see me in the evening, it's very urgent, sir, I want you to see me in the evening. He can make it as respectful, as requestful as possible, but that's not really a request. Is that a request? The army general does not have an option to say, sir, I am busy this evening, let us discuss this tomorrow. Even though it could be a trivial thing, the moment the commander-in-chief says, please see me in the evening, means see me in the evening. The army general knows this very clearly, right? How do we get this get this knowledge. This is never taught in any schools. Isn't this knowledge innate, which we acquire at the same time when we acquire language? Then how could we know that there is a distinction between the use of language and the knowledge of language? But that distinction is really blurred. The acquisition of the knowledge of use of language comes along with the acquisition of language. Therefore, the knowledge of the use of language could very well be part of knowledge of language itself. Therefore, linguistic theory must account for these things. A theory that puts itself as a great theory for accounting abstraction, which we do not have microscopes to account for. I mean, linguistic theory has done great job by restricting itself and accounting for aspects of I language. But there is a startling evidence for us to show that the knowledge of E language is also part of knowledge of language. Therefore, a theory which accounts for I language must account for the knowledge of language use as well. These are the examples. Making sense? Look at this. When someone says, lunch के लिए चलें, right? This is a question. Lunch के लिए चलें, or it's a suggestion. Let's go for lunch. And someone answers, अभी तो मुझे बहुत काम है. What does this mean? That no, I cannot come. How did we understand this? How did we interpret this thing? Where is the negative element in the sentence? Is there any negative element anywhere? अभी तो मुझे बहुत काम है is a direct affirmative declarative sentence. It doesn't say negation anywhere. I mean, people had a choice to say, no, I will not come. But when people choose to say, अभी तो मुझे बहुत काम है, what's going on there? That is, we at times, without getting into much details, I can say at times, people don't want to be negative directly. Right? How do we know when we don't need to be negative directly? Who taught us this thing? This is definitely the knowledge of language use. But the fact that nobody taught us these things and we acquired these things on our own as innate part forces us to conclude that such a knowledge is part of knowledge of language. We can definitely put them in two categories at knowledge of the use of language and knowledge of language. But again, ultimately the knowledge of the use of language is part of knowledge of language. That's the point I am trying to make. Alright? So, we stop with this example. There are tons of such examples in language. You can think of more. Alright? Thank you.